All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a committee meeting for the no longer called Schools of Choice, but the Magnet Academy working committee. Tonight we have 3 members here. Ms. Morris is not able to make it. She had a prior commitment. So we are going to go over the agenda items. The first agenda item is to go over the handbook. And with that, I'm going to open the floor to Ms. Samick and Dr. Aguilar.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Jeanette Samick, Chief Academic Officer. From our last official board meeting, we were asked to work with principals and academy directors to review the information for the Magnet Academy's handbook. In the process of doing that, we have held 8 different meetings inviting the principal, the academy director or lead teacher, a community member, and a parent from each of the schools involved. So we did have a elementary school level meeting, a middle school level meeting, and a high school level meeting. Then we followed up with the 4 pathways. We had a meeting with world language immersion, the arts, STEM, health, and then we also had a meeting for the other academies that really don't have pathways. And in that process, we reviewed almost all the components in the Lafayette Magnet Academy's handbook that is being presented to you tonight. In the dark shade of blue is anything that may have been previously approved by this committee, and therefore is already in our mind when we were having our meetings a non-negotiable. So we left those items in, and then other components were discussed regarding your points of entry, your entrance requirement, requirements for continuance, as well as expectations.
So you want to start on page 1?
Yes, sir. We can start on page 1. Page 1 has the logo and also has the new name, Lafayette Parish School Systems Magnet Academies.
All right. I think we can move on to the first substantive page, so that would be 4.
Okay. Thank you. Page 4, application management. Regarding the points of entries for the elementary school academies, we looked at arts, science, which will be the STEM. For being pre-K through 4th grade is points of entry. And for world language immersion, it would have to be pre-K through 1st grade.
I had a question on that. Dr. Aguilar, you'd mentioned the possibility of, I think decoupling was the word you might have used, pre-K from the different academies, and maybe it's should be in some and not for others. But do you have an opinion on that? Or, for instance, if a kid's in pre-K in language, then certainly that should move forward. But
my thoughts are that we ought to look very closely at decoupling pre-K with J. Wallace James and the academy there at that school. Absolutely.
Is that something you're going to look at over the next year, or something you're going to implement for this handbook, I guess?
So, Mr. Knezik, what I'd like to do is just give me another month to make sure that recommendation is solid, and then come back to the board for board authority.
Okay, thank you.
J. Wallace James only.
So, again, this is a committee, so I just asked my board members if there's anything specific that you want to address on this application management section for points of entry. Let me know. Same thing for the public. If anybody has a question or comment on the application management points of entry. I can't see the exterior monitor, but I'm assuming that it's the same as this interior monitor. Are you able to see what we're seeing on the same on the big screen? Great.
Brian, screen down.
All right, I think we can move on to the next page, page 5.
So page 5 for this coming year, 18-19, is very detailed on its dates because we are getting off to a little later start than what we had anticipated. So next year's handbook will have to be approved because what we do want to do is make the dates a little more generic, such as picking the third Tuesday of a month or the second Wednesday of the month, as opposed to locking the board into having to approve the handbook every year because the dates change. So, but for this year, like I said, because we are starting a little bit later, if the board does approve the handbook on Wednesday night, November the 8th, our smart choice, our developer for the application asked for at least 2 to 3 weeks to work on revising the application for all the changes. So we chose that we would open the application process after Thanksgiving, which would be the Monday, November 27th. So are there any questions from board members or the public regarding the dates, phase 1, phase 2?
I understand why you're putting the detail in. I'm trying to think if there's a way that you can do both. If you can have the generic dates, but then we have an addendum or something specific for this year. Maybe a note, or let me correct myself. Maybe a memo from Dr. Aguilar with these specific dates, but then we can incorporate what should be the traditional annual dates in the handbook for approval, so that the approval...
That's a good suggestion.
So the handbook that's approved this year doesn't necessarily have to be approved again next year.
Agreed. So our for opening the applications would be a little tricky, only because technically we'd like them to open the first school day in November. So, you know, it's going to be a little tricky that the addendum would actually reflect a date later than what you're going to approve in the... But we can do that. I mean, if you're comfortable.
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think we're being open with what we're trying to do. We're just trying to, we're trying to approve a governing document for a program that's kind of a living program, living document. I think that if Dr. Aguilar sends out a memo notifying people of these specific dates.
I think we can work with this. We'll just simply make a notation that the dates approved in this handbook begin in the 1920 cycle.
Sure. And then to answer questions of the public, you can publish a memo with these dates.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then moving down to line 32, where it says see entrance criteria. So for the academic grade requirements, the end of the year academic grades must be verified by June 1. So that was something that the committee had approved, that we are not going to be using summer school grades for entry. And the reason being that students that have an F can attend summer school to remove the F to become an entry requirement of a C, but a student who ends the end of the year with a D does not have that opportunity to improve their grade to a C. So we're removing the summer school aspect.
So these are general requirements, and I understand we have some programs with special requirements. How are you going to address the special requirements for specific programs?
Well, we're actually going to, I had a stack of handbooks here. The little handbooks that we have had really teased out the requirements for each specific academy. And it's something that I wanted to discuss with our academy cohorts to see if it's something they would like to continue, where their specific requirements would be there. Otherwise, their individual handbooks that they have for the students to sign off for their schools would have the information that the parents would agree to. But that doesn't help the front end during the application process.
Right. What I want to make sure is that I'll pick JROTC. If JROTC has a requirement that it is somehow documented, but you have the, what do you want to call it, the validity, the weight of a board-approved procedure and or to enforce that. For instance, what I don't want is maybe there to be conflict between, hey, you said I only had to have a C, but Early College Academy requires me to have a whatever. You know, which one's valid? So how do we address that?
One thing we...
It's right here on the page.
I understand that we have minimum requirements, but I understand that we also have special requirements. For instance, you can't enter world language in the maybe 5th grade if you don't have a background in the language. I mean, there are going to be specific requirements. So, and I understand that each school is going to have a specific, or each program has a specific handbook maybe, or supplement to the handbook. Do we reference, I mean, maybe it's a simple reference that specific, and maybe we list the specific academies and say these specific academies have special programs. Refer to those, from this document we refer them to that document, which then brings validity to that document because this document becomes board approved. You follow me?
I do, and Ozzie, I'm going to defer to you a little bit. I think we had talked about, or you had discussed, the website as communicating the individual academy's specifications. My issue that I'm having is that we're still discussing what the expansion is going to be for some of the academies, and if that will make a difference at all on requirements.
Well, and I see those to also be more living documents. You know, the STEM Academy may change a requirement one year because they're staying up with current technology or current best practices. And I think that's okay. That document could be quickly edited and approved by the director of the program and the superintendent. It may not need board approval, but I feel like there needs to be a governing document that says, oh, hey, by the way, these are the basics, but you also need to refer to those special handbooks or special requirements for each program. And we, as the board, give that authority for those special programs to the superintendent to put into effect.
So, Mr. Knezik, I would suggest after 1, 2, and 3, which is elementary, middle, and high school applicants, that we just simply have a notation there that additional entrance requirements as authorized by the superintendent are possible.
It's fine by me.
That way, each academy would need to submit additional entrance requirements. We would determine that this is appropriate or acceptable, and then we would publish that information.
Okay. I don't think we have any comments from the board before I move on to lottery. I want to make sure I open it up to the public. Yes, ma'am. And what we're talking about now is entrance requirements.
Yes, Melanie Brevis. My son is a second grader at Myrtle Place. And I just had a quick question under General 1 elementary applicants. A completed application, attendance at an informational session or open house. Now this year, with all of the open houses having been scheduled at very last minute notice, will somebody's application still be complete if they don't make it to one of these November open houses that's coming up in the next 2 weeks?
There's additional open houses. This is still kind of like the Fall Frenzy. If you did not go to the Fall Frenzy, it doesn't disqualify you from filling out an application.
Sure.
There'll be more opportunities. Some of our schools are already scheduling open houses at their schools for later dates.
Okay, and will those be, is the idea that a student must attend an informational session or open house before the lottery actually closes, like the lottery application time closes? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and how will those be publicized besides being on the website? Will schools be?
Ozzie? The website I know is going to be developed where there's a Magnet Academy's calendar, and it's be a calendar of events. Are we publicizing any other way?
Sure. So the website is going to include every single academy's requirements, any informational session dates. There's also going to be a calendar on there. The schools are going to send that out. It's also on the application. So even the applications we've had in the past, it states on there that if you're applying to XYZ program, then you have to attend an informational session. For example, STEM or Health Careers Academy requires an informational session attendance. So the individual academies will say that too on the application. So as long as it's done before the cutoff time. So it's not that the academies is now, the Magnet Mania is now, and you only have this one shot to do it, and the application's open later.
Okay. And will the school, when you say the schools will be sending it home, they'll be sending it home in a paper letter form, so there's no confusion as far as email, Facebook, anything else?
The informational session or things like that isn't something necessarily even historically that is sent out in a paper or a letter to parents. We try to communicate the best way that we can. The website, Facebook, applications, catalogs that are referenced tonight, all of those have those specific information and the requirements on there. So it depends on the school, how they want to manage it, if they want to send out a PACE call. But again, those PACE calls are really for those students attending that program. So we have to look broader. If we're doing informational sessions for students who are not existing and currently in the program, then we're going to be using our website and using other ways of communicating. So I hope that answers your question.
My only concern with that still is I know as a parent, when my son was applying for the 2015-2016 school year, we did not attend our information session until after the lottery. It was after the lottery and he had been picked, and then we attended the informational session to get more information. So my concern is for any other existing parents, they might believe that an informational session can happen anytime and not necessarily it being contingent on their child's application going in.
Dr. Aguilar, I do have a concern about requiring attendance to the, I understand the intent. I understand the intent is that we want to make sure that the student and parent, or hopefully the student and parent understands what they're getting into. I have some concern that if we make this a strict requirement, that we may be preventing opportunity for people that don't have the means to attend informational sessions or open houses.
So, Mr. Knezik, let me just, you asked for advice. I'd like to offer it to you. I don't think that rule is necessary at all. I mean, if parents want to...
Okay, can we just can we leave it as a completed application period?
Yes.
My fellow board members, do you have any comment on that, or you guys okay with that? Okay, I don't think we need to vote. Well, so our advice, it appears collectively
would recommend
to just leave it as a completed application. You can recommend they attend the informational session, but not make it a requirement. This would be for, I would say that would be for all.
Yes, sir.
And it's, again, not because we don't want them to attend, it's because I don't want to, I mean, me personally, I don't want to preclude anybody from attending because they didn't have an opportunity. Not everybody has an extra car or has
I
the ability
agree.
to go.
This is something that I believe we're going to have parents and students who attend these events because they want to learn more about the program, but to mandate that, make it a requirement, I don't think that's necessary.
So I'd ask that you remove that from the 3 different elementary, middle, and high school.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And I just had, and I apologize if I missed the boat on this one, but on line 25 of page 5, applications will reopen only for academies with availability or with wait list of less than 20. I'm just curious how the number 20 was decided on.
Well, I don't like to speak on behalf of Barbara, unless she's in the audience. Best of my recollection, normally for the academies that have a wait list of 20, we don't get 20 openings.
Okay.
So it kind of gives a false hope that if I apply and I'm number 28, I've got a shot of getting in, where historically, normally we don't fill 20 seats on the wait list.
Sure. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Thank you.
And again, I hope I'm accurate on that.
Thank you very much.
All right, I think we're down to section D, lottery, on page 6. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Nicole Boudreau, I just have a question on line 39 and 40, page 5, proficiency in ELA, English and immersed language. Does that mean proficiency in English, or does that mean a specific grade in ELA?
Proficiency in English as determined.
So maybe we could take off ELA because that's a little scary.
Yes.
And then second question, is there any exception to the rule at any time? And I'm saying this at this point because every now and then we end up with some, or you end up with some French teachers or Spanish teachers who come with students in 2nd or 3rd grade. These parents do not intend to stay in the United States. They want to make sure their child keeps up with their language, and they request immersion even though their child is not fluent in English. Would that be a consideration for exception?
That would be through an appeal process, and the answer is yes. There's always consideration for extenuating circumstances.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we're down to the section on lottery.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
Yeah, I'm
waiting to
sorry.
see if you had any questions.
No, I don't have any. I'm
Yeah.
asking if you guys have any comments on that. Mr. Santani sent me an email too. I'm trying to decipher some of his comments to make sure that we include them. How did we address the audit requirement that the board approved?
We didn't, I apologize, I didn't figure that was part of the handbook. So I'll be honest, we didn't really specifically address how the audit would take place in regards to putting it in a handbook.
So, Mr. Knezik, I mean, I think that's an easy insert to the handbook prior to Wednesday, is that we declare in the handbook that there will be an annual audit of the lottery process results. We can add that to the handbook.
Okay, thank you. So, I do want to let my fellow board members know, Mr. Santani was trying to get here, and he's late because of traffic and getting out of work. But he has some comments he sent me, but it appears that we've already addressed a lot of those comments. So if I'm going to ask that when he does arrive, if there's a section we've already covered and he wants to address that we give him that opportunity once he gets here. All right, so for lottery, the only recommended change is that you have a sentence in there that just acknowledges that the lottery will be audited as per
yes,
the
sir.
board's guidance.
Yes.
All right, I think we can skip wait list and special needs as those have been approved already. So at the bottom of page 7, there's section G that hasn't been addressed on language immersion applicants. Is this in line with the guidance we got from Hammonds and Sills regarding ESL?
Yes.
Great.
And we've also sent out a memo effective immediately that this is in place.
Great. Okay, so now we're on, and again, if there's anybody in the public, if we go too fast or we get to a point where you want to comment, we're currently on we're going into page 8. Please just step up and let me know. Get my attention, please. So page 8 begins the discussion on priorities.
So one comment I'll make to kind of start off here is we felt it was necessary to define sibling priorities because we heard many things in discussions that we did not feel were actually siblings that were being requested a priority. So I do want to emphasize that at the bottom of the first paragraph that we have defined for the sake of the Magnet Academy's lottery, a sibling is defined as 2 or more children or offspring having one or both parents in common, a brother or sister residing at the same or different addresses, and or adopted child or children.
Thank you. Now, I see we have sibling and we have pathway. We had previously discussed pathway was for elementary and middle, and then sibling would be the one considered for, did I misspeak? Pathway was for middle and high, and sibling would be for elementary, but I see elementary in the sibling.
The only sibling priority for middle and high school is if they're twins or multiple birth on the same date. If one gets in, then the other has the option to attend with their brother or sister.
Okay, and I see how you've addressed the middle and that pathway only applies to middle and high school by indirectly saying that if they've attended the lower grade Magnet Academy programs aligned with the next level academy program, they'll be given priority to that academy.
Correct. There's no elementary school priority given for a pathway because that's the entry level.
Okay, and we're not adding any additional restrictions. I'm just acknowledging we're not adding any additional restrictions for, say, a student that just moved here in the 4th grade or just got into an academy in a later grade but didn't necessarily spend 4 or 5 years in a program. And it is because we believe that if we have granted the student access into the lower grade academy and they have completed that granting them into the program means that they've already somehow met the criteria to get to that point.
Well, actually, on pathway in the blue area, applicants who have not attended a lower grade Magnet Academy program but have at least 2 years of experience called merit would be given a pathway priority.
I'm talking more about a student that may not, like, moved here in the 3rd grade and got into an academy by chance. They didn't start that academy in kindergarten or 1st grade. What I'm saying is we're not putting a year restriction, like you must have attended that program for a certain amount of years. I think the answer is yes. I just want to make sure that I understand that. That's what we're kind of saying.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Santani,
I know you're on page 8. I was listening to it the whole time.
Great. Well, you heard that we mentioned that we got some of your input, but a little bit of it has already been included. I think it's best if you tell us what you want to address whenever. Yes, sir. All right, does anybody have any comment from the board or the public on this section here called Priorities for Sibling and Pathway? This right now does not set any restrictions on any of the number of seats or anything like that. It just talks about that the only pathway for elementary would be sibling, and the only pathway, I'm sorry, the only priority for elementary would be sibling, and the only priority for middle and high school would be those that have been in a pathway.
Question. Peggy Feehan for Codofield. I missed the meeting last week in the afternoon, but Dr. Hash Broussard said that there was talk about for immersion, like a parent that is an alumni or a parent that speaks the language would have priority. I don't see it anywhere in the handbook. Was it in the merit? Is it somewhere on an addendum? Can it be considered? We feel strongly that, especially for French, especially for culture, that parents that speak French, that have been in French immersion, or like the gentleman that was here at a meeting, I forgot his name, his last name was Daigle. You know, he's one of the last speakers in his family. He should have priority for his kids, in my opinion, for French immersion.
Thank you.
Is this something that we can see in the handbook?
Well, I do appreciate your opinion, I really do. It does not fit the definition of sibling priority. And as I said to the committee, we could look at it as a different type of priority if the board so chooses, but I cannot classify that as a sibling priority, alumni or an adult who speaks the language in the household.
Merit? What can it be called?
So I can briefly address that. I think to your earlier comment, I think the only time it's been mentioned has been from a Codofield representative. A sibling is not defined as a parent or a grandparent or an adult of any kind, unless of course it's a brother or sister. So I am not, I'm certainly not willing to entertain that because anybody born and raised in South Louisiana can claim to be, you know, of that descent. So I know that I'm not interested in that as a board member. I'm not sure how you all feel about it. But.
Well, I would just say that as of right now for this handbook, we have one priority for elementary called sibling. We have formed a world language committee, and I think this would be a great topic for the World Language Committee to address.
I agree. It definitely will be a topic for discussion.
And with those, and I understand they're going to be providing recommendations to the board, so maybe at that point we can further look into legacy or whatever other types of priority we might be able to consider.
Let's add another one too.
No. All right. Do we have any other questions or comments on this? Yes, ma'am.
Melanie Brevis, Myrtle Place. I just wanted to clarify, because I know it's a concern for a lot of parents at our school since we just formed our preschool this year. Is pre-K getting any kind of priority, or do they have to put their names in the lottery and, you know, like with everyone else in order to go to kindergarten?
Dr. Aguilar, we discussed that briefly, and make sure that that's the same thing that we were discussing earlier, is that Dr. Aguilar is looking at, well, you were looking at decoupling only for J. Wallace.
J. Wallace James only.
Okay, so then that would mean that pre-K for Myrtle means that they would move on
And all
to
the other
kindergarten.
That's
schools.
correct.
Okay.
It would be
Okay.
a pathway.
So they would still need to put their names in the lottery, but they would have pathway priority?
Not if this is approved. Once in a pathway, you do not have to reapply.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. We are now going to be on the bottom of page 8, enrollment and continuance expectations. Actually, the blue part, enrollment, was previously approved by the board. So there's a little section there called, well, it doesn't have a name. It just says, if seats are available and entrance criteria are met, entry into an academy for grades K to 8 may close after the 10th day of school, up to the first progress report date, depending on the academy. That just seems like an administrative addition.
It is. There are some programs where late entry past 10 days is really putting a child too far behind to be successful. I know that doesn't sound possible, but it really is for some of the elective courses in academy. And for some academies, they really can accommodate taking a child all the way up to the first progress report, which is 4.5 weeks. It actually was a request made by the principals to have a compromise on the spread of dates.
All right. Brings us to expectations. With the blue part that's already been approved by the board. So for academics, it looks like the first paragraph has not been addressed by the board yet. In grades 5 to 12, students must maintain a minimum of a C in all academy courses and an average of a C with no Fs in the 4 core courses to remain in good academy standing. An academy may set higher grade requirements for more stringent courses. Language immersion programs require a minimum of a C in ELA, in addition to the courses immersed in the language. That seems to be the first main topic.
And this was discussed, again, at the elementary level, the middle school level, the high school level. Principals did a little give and take. They made very compelling comments. Some wanted C's across the board with no exceptions. Others said that, you know, for example, the arts, a student with a D in math can still be excelling in the arts and shouldn't have the door closed on them. So we kept working with it. We were all in agreement that we shouldn't have Fs at the upper level, 5th through 12th grade. There should be no Fs for the 4 core, and that their specific pathway coursework should be C's or better. If you notice above, some of the academies may set higher standards, and this is what you alluded to earlier in the evening.
One thing I'm not clear on is, what is the benchmark for the evaluation of the grade? Is it 6-week report cards? Is it semester report cards? Is it the previous year's report cards?
It's the end of the year report card. That's why all grades have to be verified by June 1st.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Mr. Broussard.
Ms. Samick, at the end of the year, if the student, earlier we had on one of the entries that if you go to summer school, you are not eligible to come back into the program. Do that child, or that student, I'm sorry, that student who was in the path, who was in the Magnet Academy, do they go back to their zone school, or are they allowed to stay on campus even though they're out of zone?
So this is continuance. This is someone who's already in the program and not entering. So if they're in the program and the principal allows them to attend summer school to remove the F, that would be acceptable. They're in the program. It's not for entrance. So to answer your question, if a student goes through probation and does not improve their academic coursework in a timely manner, then actually they would be withdrawn from the academy and report back to their zone school.
Do you think there needs to be any clarification about that, so that it's not misinterpreted that if a student fails a class or gets a D, they don't have an opportunity to attend summer school to maintain their eligibility?
Absolutely can add it.
I think that would be a good idea. Yes, ma'am. I was saying that I think maybe it needs to be clarified so that it's clear to a principal that a student has an opportunity to go to summer school and get a better grade in a class that they previously got a D or an F in. Yes, ma'am.
Christy Wright, counselor. I have a question. Christy Wright, counselor at J. Wallace James. I have a question, and I think it's the same question as you. The way this is worded, it doesn't specifically say final grades of C, and I know we haven't gotten to due process, but there's a due process procedure in place, and I feel like you're saying, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, that a student can remain in that academy all year long with Fs and cannot be removed until the final report card.
Again, that's the probation period. We had kind of talked that elementary school might be different than middle or high school, especially high school with the credits. But elementary school, the whole goal is for the students to be successful,
Correct.
whether they're in a magnet academy or whether they're in a home zone school. So the probation period may be to the end of the year for the child to do credit recovery, grade recovery, and work with SBLC.
I totally get it. I phrased it as a negative, and I meant it to be a positive. So I don't want to see a child having a low grade at the end of 9 weeks. I wish that there was some sort of when does the due process begin? Is it the end of the first marking period? Is it the end of the second? When do we say, okay, now you're on probation, now you have to?
So being a counselor, you know due process starts as soon as you see a child is in
Yes.
trouble. And you put the SBLC committee together and you work with the child.
Okay.
So one comment that I kind of took away from our high school meeting is when Academy director said, this kind of puts more of the emphasis on me to make sure they're academically doing well in their core subjects. Right. As I said, elementary school is a little different. Y'all are a little more of a family raising the child, where sometimes at the high school level the child is more on their own. This kind of brings that family component together that everybody has a little more at stake.
Okay, no, that makes me very happy. The other thing is, in elementary school this year, ELA is separated into 2 grades, ELA and reading, so there are actually 5 core subject areas. That might be something
So noted.
Okay,
Thank you.
So, Ms. Samick, unfortunately,
Oh, no, it's still there.
So, Ms.
Yes, sir.
Samick, unfortunately, I'm still not clear. At what point in time would the student, if a student did not maintain the C average, at what point in time are they removed from the program and sent back to their home zone school? Is it after the year is up, or at what point does that happen? I understand that when you start to see the grade slipping, you try to address the problem, but if it continues to happen, is it mid-year? Is it, do they stay the rest of the year?
So page 10, number 5, probation. Probation is an opportunity for the academy staff, student, and the parents to address the situation prior to removal from academy. Each academy will determine the length and type of probation. So it's going to be up more to, a site-based management decision as to how long the probation period is. Each academy may wish to handle it slightly different. We also have an agenda item, I think, that addresses due process, that if the board so chooses to implement that, we will replace this process with 2.3. So we're going to talk about that in more detail.
Okay. I just think from a policy perspective, we should put some kind of floor on it so that the school doesn't say, well, we're going to continue the probation into next year, and then the following year, and then the following year.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Gardner.
Jennifer Gardner, principal of Alma. I sat in all these meetings, and Mr. Jeanette is right here, also a middle school principal. And we were we were an advocate for the C's across the core and in the elective. And I think that is, we don't want to send a child out the first 9 weeks, the middle school. That is not, then we haven't done our job as a middle school to help remediate the child, to do grade recovery at the middle school level. I think Mr. Jeanette is shaking his head also. We really see that if a child is struggling at the end of the first 9 weeks, as we automatically do, my Arts Academy director sends a letter to the parents, but we're going to go rather than just a letter of information, but more of a contract form where the parent will come in. We will sit down with the Academy director, the principal, and we'll say, okay, Johnny has an F in math. What are we going to do as a team to see we can provide this child everything he needs? And then the next time he pulls up to a D, well, look, Johnny, you pulled it up to D, and we're going to keep working together. If we keep making Fs, we'll address that also. But until we put our full faith effort into helping that child, there's no way I would just say, Johnny, at Christmas time, you didn't do what you needed to do, and we would send him on our way, because that's not fair to him or the other. But at the end of the school year, if we've all done our parts, then this packet would provide for him to be able to go back to his base school. But I think as a good faith at the middle school, we will do what we need to do to provide that support for him. And the criteria coming in, we have 20 children who are with us now that would not have made it based on this criteria just academically. And those 20 children currently have D's and F's on their report card. So they are automatically struggling now. They came in as a strugglers, not doing, like we have a lot that don't do homework, don't miss a lot of school. So the pattern is kind of followed with them. So if the criteria is set in the beginning, then your criteria as the year goes, it should kind of balance itself, and then we will work with that child.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeanette, Principal, Karen Crow Middle School, the Biomedical Academy. Is it on? Okay. I just was looking for some clarification when it came to continuance with the grade recovery going to summer school. From my understanding that if the child must maintain the C's in order to remain in the academy as part of the continuance. Of course, as the principal, I believe we talked about having the ability to continue probation for that student. If so, we decided that child has really been meeting requirements, has been working, has been progressing, and his levels have been rising, that we would go ahead and give him an opportunity to remain maybe on probation for the next year. But I'm understanding here that if they make an F, they could recover that grade and remain in the academy. But if they are making, if they're making a D, they can be removed from the academy. Is that making sense what I'm saying there? Or if they're not making the C, if they make a D in the grade in an average of a D in a course, in a core area course, then they could be removed from the academy. But if they make an F, they could, from what I understood earlier, they could recover the grade in summer school and remain in the academy if they made a C.
So if the student is promoted and part of the extended day learning process, that's part of their probation. So in essence, as we currently do for 5 of our middle schools, the students have an opportunity to be promoted without going to summer school as long as they're attending that after school, the extended day program. So that could be applied to a student for D as well.
Okay. No, and I agree, and I understand that. I think maybe I didn't make myself clear. It's like, okay, if a child makes a D in a core area course, according to the continuance, that they could be removed from the academy. Am I understanding that?
It says an average of a C with no Fs. It
Okay.
doesn't say anything about a D.
So if they make a C in an average of an average of a D in a core area class,
They could be removed.
they could be removed. But if they make an F, they can attend summer school and recover that grade and make a C and continue. Am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, I don't think you're quite clear on that.
Okay, all right. I just wanted a clarification because I was confused on that.
Yeah.
Is that?
I'm still confused. I think what he's saying is what we said earlier, that if a...
Entrance and continuance are different.
Okay.
We want the child entering an academy with the appropriate skill sets to be successful. So we're removing attending summer school for any student entering an academy. Once they're in the academy, we want to, they were successful in order to get in. We want to continue that success. We do know students will sometimes struggle at the next grade level. Going from 5th grade to 6th grade, they may struggle in 6th grade. So we do want to give them the opportunity to attend summer school to recoup any Fs they may have incurred, because a F puts them out. A D average they can do, again, they could do grade recovery, they can do the extended day learning. They have other supports at the school to help them to be successful in 7th grade. But if they have Fs, then technically they need to have the Fs removed. So summer school would be their option.
Could they attend summer school with a D?
They can. Go ahead. Ms. Gardner has been principal of the middle school summer school.
Currently, last year, we had 361 children in attendance at summer school with just Fs, and that was not even double courses. So probably over 200 took a morning session and an afternoon. The ability to accommodate children that have Ds for recovery, I just don't think it's really hard to get teachers to teach in the summer, number one. Number two, the capacity to hold those. I just don't think we would have it. So as an alternate, we had discussed in the meeting the grade level, not the pathway, but the middle school meeting, that we would enter in a contract, like I was talking about a while ago. So let's say I'm going to give you, and STEM does this currently. So after the first 9 weeks, Sue has a D in math. Sue's parents come in and I have a very outlined contract, and I might say, Sue, you need to complete 75% of all your homework. You need to have less than 5 days of unexcused absences for the rest of the year. Whatever it is, we come up with this contract. If Sue meets the contract and has a D at the end of the year, I can say, Sue, you have done everything. You and your parents have done everything you needed to do. Thank you so much for working hard, because that child and that parent has done what they needed to do to show that they want to put forth effort for this privilege to be at this academy. I can, as the site-based administrator, say, Sue, you're going to be able to come and stay back at Alamo next year because you did what you needed to do. On the other hand, John's mom has come in, and John has not done any homework all year long. He has had discipline. He has missed 13 days of school. His parents, his teachers, he's not done any grade recovery, any grade option. He still ends up with a D of the year. John, you have not met your contract. You've not done what you needed to do, so I'm sorry. I'm going to have to exit you from the academy. So to allow, if we can come together as a middle school to where we can all get together and agree that this is a great contract, that we can work with the teachers, the students, the parents, the counselors, it allows that kid who is still a struggler, and it's always going to struggle in English, always struggle in math, still the opportunity that that's the best they can do, and they did everything they needed to do. And I'm okay with that kid, because that kid did the best they could do. But here, John didn't do anything. So that privilege that he has to come to the academy, a privilege can be taken away any day of the week. You know, you didn't fulfill, you get it taken away. So that's kind of how we discussed at the middle school level to address the Ds. Does that make sense?
It does. I just wonder if there's a situation where you have a kid that gets a D and a kid that gets the F. The kid that gets the F has a chance to go to summer school.
I think we said that was off the table, though. Am I correct? No summer. Not for continuation. That even though they had an F, they could go to summer school to get the F, to go back to their base school, to stay on grade level, to where high school. Miss Samick is shaking her head no. I misunderstood.
Mr. Knezik, unless I'm missing something, I think the difference here is a D average versus one F. So if they have 3 Fs, they're out. Am I missing something here? No, 1 F, they can go to summer school. But 1 D, they're not going to go to summer school, but 1 D is not a D average. So they may still have a C.
That's a D. No, we're talking about end of the year averages, correct, Ms. Samick? A D and an F end of the year average.
That's right, but we were not comparing apples to apples a minute ago, I don't believe. You were, but others were not.
Mr. Knezik, I want to be on record to advise you that this is an incredibly low bar that you're setting for.
I agree.
For academy students. We started this process attempting to increase the rigor of these programs. We're setting the bar at a C average. That's lower than TOPS eligibility for college entrance. I think the board really needs to look at having the will and the courage to say a C average is not the kind of program we ought to be creating in Lafayette, where we're transporting students outside of their school zones in some cases to go to programs merely to boost up enrollment in these programs?
I would vote for an A average, just so you know. But
Mr. Knesset, I would start with at least a 2.25 grade point average.
Well, right now it says C. So
it's a C right now.
So a 75 is the lowest C in the report card, and that's why we felt, and I'm sorry, Ms. Amick, I misunderstood. I really thought, and maybe I missed because I was doing some sideboard talking over there, but I really thought that we, as a committee, had decided that a C to continue, because a C was a 75. If they made an F, they were eligible to go to summer school, to go back to their zone school and be promoted to a grade level to stay on track to graduate. That they were not eligible at all for the academy anymore because they did not do what they needed to do. And that a D, we would work with a contract situation. So that is what my understanding, and my head is shaking in the audience. When I left, that was my understanding, because we thought that was rigor enough. Since it was a C, we thought the rest was rigorous enough to keep them where we needed to be.
All right, Mr. Broussard.
I can fully understand the need and the want for the teachers and the counselor and the principal to work with a student. But if we are going to engage in this program, we must have strict regulations and rules. I would say at the end of the year, whether you've done what you're asked to do to maintain that D, or you did not do what you're asked to do to maintain the D on F, you didn't meet the criteria with the C. So you go back to your zone school or you exit the academy. So the C is the C. Your grade average tells you whether you can stay or go.
Mr. Broussard, I fully support that. I believe that every child has a right to public education. Every child has a zone school. And I believe that the Arts Academy, the STEM Academy, any academy that are magnet academy that a parent applies to is a privilege. And I believe that when you don't do what you need to do for that privilege, then your privilege is removed. And I believe that everyone, again, gets to go back to their zone school and receive that free education. We're investing money in transportation and the extra teachers, the 8 extra teachers that it takes to run my school. So yes, sir, I do believe it is a privilege. And if that's what the board decides, I'm in full support.
All right. And Dr. Aguilar, I think that since we're setting the minimum criteria here, we also are now referring to these academy-specific handbooks where those directors have the ability to increase the standards for their specific academy, that we're providing the opportunity for higher standards at the individual academies. And I do think it would be an interesting study if you could come back and tell us next year what the performances and what the grade averages for students in these programs, so we can see, are they hovering around 2.0 or are these more 3.0, 4.0 students?
So I do want the record to reflect that I spoke to Mr. Craig, and we both understood that the continuance for the summer school was to remain in the academy. So my apologies to the committee out there if we did not understand that they could attend summer school, but they were still being removed from the academy.
So, Mr. Knesset, if we have 5 core subjects, someone said there are 5, at a C in each of those, that's 10 quality points. And if we have 2 academy courses and the individual makes Bs in both of those 2 additional courses, they end up with a 2.28 grade point average for the year, which is certainly not a high bar. If you're there because you want to be in these special courses, that you would maintain a C in all of your core subjects, but a B in your academy courses. It's just something to consider.
Well, I'll gladly change the language with whatever recommendation you come back with. Obviously Wednesday is when we vote on putting this into effect. If you want to change this language to raise the standards, that's fine with me, and I'm sure it's fine with everybody else. We'll discuss it. Again, I think it's maintaining is different than entering.
Absolutely.
So
So members of the board, just anticipate that the language will say that the child has to have a grade point average of 2.25.
All right. Yes, sir.
So that, okay. So to Dr. Aguilar's new piece of information, so that would be across all their, well, no, across all their courses, their core 4 as well as, so, okay. And I was just trying to make sure I understood that we're saying this, as it's presented, is saying that you have to have a C average across all your core 4 classes. So you could conceivably have a D in math or English, and then A's and B's and everything else, and you'd be fine.
You're correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
He did a C average and then 2 B's. Mr. Santani?
I'm going to have a little bit of a different opinion, I think. I kind of come at it from, I don't want to use the word permissive, but I can certainly envision a scenario where a student is in the arts program or in immersion courses or something like that, where they're not necessarily strong in English or math or something along those lines, where they don't quite hit the 2.25 or the 2.0, but show great promise in their specialized instruction. And we run the risk of running into a situation where a student goes back to their zone school that they don't get the specialized instruction that was really interesting them in being in school, and perhaps we do a greater disservice to them that way. So I just want to put that out there to make sure that we're taking into account the fact that if we put all these restrictions and say you have to have a C average, you have to have a B average to get up to 2.28 in your core courses, that we're making this, I agree, not high. It's not high for me, but it may be high for some students. And I just want to make sure that we're not going to run the risk of letting somebody fall through the cracks who could really benefit from a program just because they might have gotten a 2.1, 1.9. I would recommend, just because I come with solutions, I don't just complain, changing it to an or, a C in the core courses or a C in your academy core, or whatever the academy sets as the requirements, right? So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Aguilar, how difficult would it be to put together the data to show us what the actual grade point averages are for those students that we have now? I know we asked you for a lot of data. You can say no.
So let me just say no at this point.
Say no. I'm good with that.
Actually, I don't think it would be that difficult. We'll just get with the programmers and we'll identify this. And Justin, I'm open-minded about an or, so that there's some flexibility. Just a comment, maybe we need to not consider calling these magnet academies if we set the bar that low.
Well, we have the opportunity. Remember, we have the opportunity in each specific handbook for each respective academy to raise those bars as well.
Well,
Yes,
I was
sir.
going to say that, probably simply putting an or in there reinforces to the principals, as Ms. Gardner just said, that she's going to take it on a case-by-case basis and make sure that the students, even if they fall a little short, she's going to work with the student, work with the parents. Putting an or in there probably reinforces to the principals that they do, in fact, have the latitude that they need to make sure that they're getting the students the attention that they need.
Thank you. All right. We are now top of page 10 under a section called probation, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the second half of the discipline section on page 9, starting around line 34. Adds students who incur level 3 or 4 discipline steps recommended for an expulsion or attending an alternative school may be placed on probation or removed from the academy. Any board member comments on that? Any public comments on that? And I believe later on we have what is defined, or there's another place where we can find what level 3 or 4 discipline steps are. Thank you. All right, now we are on top of page 10, section 5, probation. Probation is an opportunity for the academy staff, a student, and the parent to address a situation prior to removal from an academy. Each academy will determine the length and type of probation. If a student does not meet the expectations of the academy after the probation period ends, the student will be removed from the academy. Seems to be straightforward. It allows flexibility.
It does. We know some of our academies, like Junior ROTC, has very stringent requirements. Some academies not quite as stringent for participation or other issues. So we wanted to allow and not make it different for elementary, different for middle, different for high. We allowed it to be kind of flexible.
Okay, I don't think I have any questions on that. All right, any board member comments? Doesn't look like we do. Any public? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to remind the board that immersion is not magnet as in STEM or biomedical, or, you know, when those academies where you have to have a good grade in math or in science to be to continue. It's just the regular curriculum with another language of instruction. So if you raise the bar, then can we take immersion out of the book? Or because we don't want a kid that struggles in math, because he struggles in math, to be taken out because he struggles in math. It has nothing to do with the language of instruction. It has to do with him struggling in math, and he should be able to stay in the immersion program, even if he struggles in math. Because a student that struggles in math in English is not taken out of math because he doesn't understand math. He's staying in math. So it's not an elitist program. It's not STEM. It's not. Am I making any sense? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments on that? All right, that brings us to line 30 of page 10 under the removal from an academy section. The stuff in blue again was previously approved by the board. In the event that a student is sent to an alternative site, the student will be removed from the academy. The school's administration and academy director may appeal this decision to retain the student in the academy. Then there's a blue section, I'll read that for clarity. It says, if the student is removed from the academy, the student would return to their zone school when leaving the alternative site. And then it finishes with, once a student is removed from an academy, the student cannot reapply to an academy during that school year. Do you have any board member comments on that? All right. Any public comments on this section of the removal from an academy? All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Hidalgo.
If the student is removed from the academy, the student will return to their zone school when leaving the alternative site. And then it goes on to say, once a student is removed from the academy, the student cannot reapply to any academy during that school year. I was under the impression that they would have to sit out at least another year, so they wouldn't be able to reapply for the following year. Is that not what we discussed? Or was that?
Well, how would they reply if it's middle of the school year? How would they apply for an academy in the middle of the school year? It seems like it would. The only eligibility that you could remove would be for the next school year. Is that correct?
In theory, a kid could commit an infraction in the first week or two of school, really messes up, gets sent to the alternative sites, and that principal might and a director might appeal it when he leaves the academy, he return back to the academy. I mean, that would be an unusual circumstance.
So I'd like to just simply add a word. It says, once a student is removed from the academy, the student cannot reapply to any academy during that or the following school year. So that's 3 words.
So you want to add the words "or following" after the word "that" in line 35. So before we open it up, do you, Ms. Samick or Mr. Craig, have any? I mean, what's the intent is that we don't have kids dropping out and then going right back in that are maybe not meeting the standards.
You actually have some principals out there that do have some soft hearts, and they felt like that a child makes a mistake, gets sent to an alternative school, does their time, goes back to their home zone school, that they should have the opportunity to apply to academy the following year. So, again, it's the wishes of the board whether you want to remove them from having that ability to apply the next year or not. Some students do leave the alternative site during the school year, so being sent back to their zone school, some principals thought they should have the opportunity to apply the next year.
All right. And Mr. Hidalgo, I don't know my opinion on this. I have to think about it. I don't. So this might be something we need to vote on as a recommendation.
That's fine.
But yes, sir.
So my comment would be that I think it's already covered in your entrance requirements, because it says in the entrance requirements, at least for middle and high school, that they can't have a 3 or 4 step level discipline. So you may already be covered in that fact that if they get sent out, obviously they're going back to the home zone school. If they try to apply the next year, they can't meet the entrance criteria because they have the 3 or 4 on their previous year. So
it's a good point.
It's a good point.
Alternate side, yeah.
And I guess more to my pointing, adding it just to solidify it. I mean, that's a great point.
Just more words if you want to.
Yeah, we love words.
Mr. Santani.
Point out that the discipline section of the expectation says students who incur level 3 or 4 discipline steps recommended for an expulsion or attending an alternative school may be placed on probation or removed from the academy. But then in the paragraph under discussion, it says, in the event that a student is sent to an alternative site, the student will be removed from the academy. So I feel like we might need to clean that up a little bit. Sounds like we have a shall and a may situation in a couple of different spots. What's the recommendation? Recommendation is pick one.
What was the intent, Ms. Samick or Mr. Craig? It sounds like the recommendation is that we intend that if they have this level 3 or 4 discipline issue, then they shall be removed. Is that?
Without speaking for all the middle school principals, I think if you have, so when we're talking a level 3 or level 4, those are significant violations of the discipline policy. And I think the feeling amongst the principals was if they're committing a level 3 or level 4, they've kind of excluded themselves from the academy.
Okay. Can you clean up the language that Mr. Santani referred to with to make sure that it reflects that, the shalls?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yes, sir.
If I may also, I think also when it was talked about the alternative sites, they were also including homebound students that may, be put on homebound for whatever need, whether it be a physical need or an emotional, psychological need, and that those students could, if they completed that or they recovered, whatever would be, they would be eligible to return to the academy, even if they could not meet the coursework that year, because there were some that schools felt like that's why the principals were given the option of allowing them to stay in the academy if they were on homebound, if they could still complete the, or attend the classes on campus, whatever it may be, and still complete the coursework, whereas others maybe could not and would have to be removed from the academy, but would give them the opportunity if they, were able to return to the school setting to reapply.
So is our intent to include homebound as an alternative site, or is that not?
Yes, sir, and I'd like to thank Mr. Jeanette for pointing that out, because discipline's not associated with that, and homebound teachers are good about providing core instruction. Depending on the academy elective, that's problematic for them. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, and so that, again, thank you, Mr. Jeanette, for pointing that out.
So how do you want to clean that up? Do you want to put an exception for homebound, or do you want to define alternative site?
I think we would define and give the examples of the alternative sites. And then we clean up the language with regards to level 3, level 4 infractions, which leaves the door open for a homebound student to potentially return to the academy.
All right. Before we move on to that, Mr. Hidalgo, do you want to have a motion on adding those words, or do you want to address that on Wednesday, or do you want to stick with the level 3, 4 language that's already in there?
You want to remove for 1 year or for the next?
Because I can move on if you... Okay, thank you. So we'll move forward and potentially address that issue on Wednesday. So we're on section E. The bottom of page 10, voluntary withdrawals from an academy. If a parent wishes to cancel the accepted assignment prior to the start of the new school year, the withdrawal form must be completed and submitted to the LPSS Magnet Academy's office. Once the form has been processed, the student will be reassigned to their zone school and the seat will be opened for the next student on the wait list. Any board member comments? Right. Any public comments on this? All right. So we are on the last page. At the very top is a continuance of that section. I'm going to read the blue section and then continue. Once the school year begins, any parent request to withdraw from the academy must occur at the school. The school staff should be a part of making an informed decision. If the school committee agrees that it would be in the best interest of the student to withdraw, a 5-day wait period may be implemented for students who would be attending their zone schools in LPSS different than an academy site. This would provide the student and a parent reflection time. Well, I don't necessarily like the way that's worded. I understand the intent. I think we can just set a 5-day period. Mr. Santana, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say this is a drastic improvement over the language that was in the handbook before, which said you couldn't withdraw.
Great.
So,
thank you.
Good job, guys.
Yes, sir.
Best interest of the student.
Last year's?
All right. Does anybody have any other comment on this section? All right. So the bottom of page 11, last two sections. One's transportation. Transportation utilizing designated satellite stops is available for all students who choose to attend an LPSS magnet, who choose to attend the LPSS magnet academies. Parents must submit transportation requests at the academy school site when enrolling the academy students. Prior to the first day of school, parents are encouraged to check with the academy school to ensure their students are appropriately tagged as bus riders. Any board member comments on this? Staff? Any public comments on this? All right. Last section, Section G, athletics and extracurricular activities. Magnet Academy students who wish to participate in athletic programs may do so in compliance with all eligibility rules and their level of competition. For high school students, this includes compliance with the guidelines of the Louisiana High School Athletic Association. Magnet Academy students who wish to participate in extracurricular activities may do so unless the guideline of a state or national organization which sanctions the activity prohibits immediate participation. Any comments from the board or public on that? Okay. This is the end of our review of the handbook, and before we move on, I just want to open it back up to anybody who wants to talk about anything in this handbook today.
I do.
Mr. Hidalgo.
I'd like to go back to that page 10, line 35, and add the words. I'd like to make a motion that we add the words or the following school year. Well, school year's already in there, but.
So Mr. Hidalgo would like to add the words or the following after the word that in line 35, page 10. And he has made a motion. And does he have a second? Second by Mr. Broussard. All right, so we have a motion on the floor to add 2 words to that section. So for the public, what we're talking about is when someone is removed from an academy, we're going to further restrict their ability to enter an academy the following school year, not only the year they're removed, but also the following school year. That's what the motion is. So I'm going to open it up to public comment on that first. Does anybody have any comment or concern on that issue? Mr. Santani.
I have a concern that I'm soft-hearted like the principals evidently. If they still have to meet the entrance requirements, correct? Which includes no 3s and 4s. And no what? And no attendance at an alternative school. So why do we need to add this?
I'm confused at what the concern is. It's
or
2 words.
It's 2 superfluous words.
The silence was enough. Thank you.
Superfluous. I mean, I don't understand why we need to add 2 words when we already have words that do the same thing.
Ms. Samick, could you...
do we care to answer that?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Santani. Ms. Samick, could you clarify for me again that if a student is removed, if a student is into because of a level 3 or 4 infraction discipline, are they eligible to apply the following year in the academy?
Right now, the way it's worded is because it's under continuance and not entrance. In other words, they met the entrance requirement. Now they're continuing in the program. That if we say they cannot apply for any other academy the next year, technically they could apply. They would not be accepted for the criteria except as a late entry. In other words, the entrance level, the point of entry is K through 4, 6th grade, 9th grade, some academies 10th grade. So if they were a late entry in 11th grade, then basically it goes under the review of the school level committee.
Okay, then I'll leave my wording in the I'm holding my motion. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say you're going to pull it or you keep it? So we're going to vote on it. Okay. Is there any other public comment on this? And my only comment is that I'm not comfortable voting yes to support this right now. Maybe I can be convinced by Wednesday, but as of right now, I think that the language is restrictive enough, and I think that we have other criteria in place that, in effect, can do the same thing. So, does anybody else have any comment on this particular motion?
I think,
Mr. Broussard.
I think, Mr. Kniss, I can understand why you're sort of reluctant for voting yes or voting at all on it, but we need to put something in our handbook that restrict bad behavior to continue to be bad behavior and accepted bad behavior. Hoping that would never come to that, but there should be some language in there that help us to maintain the structure that we want to in this Magnet Academy. I'm not saying that John cannot be reformed, but I would, we should not be doing things unnecessarily. So if that's one of the challenges we've got, if we continue to babysit one, then we'll have to babysit all of them. We want to build a program that's going to be a model to everybody else around, and just not as strict as we can be, but as applying the rules and sticking to the rules as we can.
All right, thank you.
Can I just add some clarification to that? It's not necessarily removal for removing from an academy is not limited to going to an alternative site. So that whole section of removal from an academy could be for a student that's making Fs, that's doing something else that is currently in that school year that they're not doing the way that they're supposed to be doing. They've been on a contract, they work with Jennifer Gardner and her team, and they still haven't maintained their grades that they're supposed to. They haven't maintained their attendance that they're supposed to. So yes, for the following year, it goes without saying that for an entry criteria, they won't consider you if you've gone to an alternative site, but they will consider you if you have C's or higher and other things. So a student could have gone to summer school and raised their grades and then tried to reapply the following year. I think what Mr. Hidalgo is trying to say is if you add that sentence at the end of it, it makes it clear that whether it's for going to an alternative site or not, any violation of any of those criterias prevents you from being able to apply the following year to any academy.
I understand. Thank you. I do understand, and I'm just telling you that me right now tonight, I am of the thought process similar, I think, to Mr. Haney, that if a student is removed but somehow miraculously pulls it together and still meets the criteria to enter the next year, then maybe they should be considered. But again, I'm really on the fence on this right now.
So
yes,
I too want to thank Ozzy for pointing that out. I think the confusion is where the sentence is embedded. It seems to just trail right along with the whole alternative site, and I think that may be leading to the confusion. But thank you, Ozzy. You did bring up the fact as to why we wanted that in there.
Yes, sir.
So I would agree with you, is that if a student does have a bad spell or whatnot and they somehow are able to meet the entrance criteria the next year, obviously the 3-4, they can't get rid of that if they had that. But if they're able to improve while they're away, they've realized what they've done, they want to try and get back into the academy, I don't see why they should be continued to be punished for another school year when they've in fact made improvements and are trying to get back to that academy. So.
Thank you.
I think a student could potentially be removed from the program toward the end of the year for a serious disciplinary action, and I think my motion is warranted, and I take it back to the superintendent's comments earlier about, why are we calling these things magnet academies if we're not going to hold them to the higher standards that brought this conversation on to begin with. And I think but for a potential loophole that I haven't found yet, we wouldn't be hearing much argument about something that's supposedly already in there. So I stand by my motion and I'd like to call for the vote.
I'll have just a general.
Okay. Well, for this particular motion, okay, if you'd like to comment.
No, not that one.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote.
2 for, none against, 1 against.
All right, the motion's successful. So if you could include that language in the next version for Wednesday's meeting.
Yes, sir.
Before we close this out, I wanted to ask if you could, we spent a lot of time defining the pathways at our board meeting, and I think I'd like to see those reflected in this handbook, even if it's just one page that summarizes the pathways, the particular schools that the board has approved. I think it's helpful that there's one consolidated place to look at those pathways to see how they feed into each other, and also include the standalone. Pretty much if it's a Magnet Academy, include it just as a maybe one-page section at the end.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledges those.
You want those in there so that the full board approves those?
Well, the board's already, I think, approved the majority of them, if not all of them. We may have missed one or two of the standalones, I think, but I think it would be helpful if they were actually in this document that says, hey, this is the Magnet Academy handbook, and oh, by the way, these are the Magnet Academies in the last section, or in the first section. You can put it wherever you think it's.
So the only tricky part there is, do you want the school names, or do you want just the name of the pathways? Because the board did direct us to have meetings to review the expansion and the development of the pathways, so it may change in the next month or two.
I didn't realize you were going to come back with that information so quickly.
We have meetings scheduled for later this week.
Well, I think we need the section in there, and I think having the schools in there that we've approved would be good. We can always bring this back up in a month or two after you've added some. Again, I think this will be a living document that we change as we see fit, and when we find places that need to be changed. So
yes, sir.
I think I'd like to include them. All right. So we have some general comments. Or yes, ma'am.
So I would just like to ask the committee to reconsider, and it doesn't have to be at this moment, but I ran the quick data regarding the GPA of the 2.25. Out of, in 6th grade, which is my largest intake of students, out of 233 Arts Academy students last year, only 6 would have not met the criteria to stay at Alma, which over 30 had an F and had the option to go to summer school. So I do believe that the 2.25 criteria is very low. That's just my opinion. And after looking at someone, I don't remember who asked for the data, but only 6 would have not been eligible. If I look at those 6 that are still there, they're still struggling, and we're working with Fs right now. And so someone asked for data, and there it is. So only 6, whereas last year we had over about 30 who had an F, 20 that attended summer school.
Well, thank you. I think, Dr. Aguilar, we could, really benefit, the board could benefit from a strong recommendation from you on that language on Wednesday.
Yes, sir. And just to be clear, a 2.25 grade point average is still very low. But we'll run the numbers, and we'll have some data for you to consider.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Stacy Hargrove. I have a child at J. Wallace James. I didn't have anything to say on it earlier, but then the conversation went on about restrictions for students who had been removed from an academy and applying the next year. I guess my concern would be with the voluntary withdrawals from an academy, because I'm just worried. I think that they had some pretty good reasons as to why it wasn't so easy for someone to just voluntarily leave a program in the middle of the year. So I wonder if we're opening up a can of worms where a student drops out of an academy, but then there's no restrictions on where they apply the following year. Can they apply for the very academy they just dropped out of, or as it stands now, they can apply anywhere? I just think it's going to cause some problems for academy directors, principals, schools, when you start to have students leaving and have empty seats where there would be a student who wanted to fill that seat at some point in time.
Good point. Yes, Mr. Hidalgo.
Ms. Samick, do we have data on how many students reapply for a program after they've opted out or withdrawn from the program?
I don't have it in front of me. I believe we can pull that data, yes.
Okay. That's an interesting, topic.
And Ms. Samick, I think that's another one that I don't know if there's a right answer. I mean, I could see there's lots of reasons why people might have to withdraw. So I think that the board could benefit, again, from a strong recommendation if we need to include some sort of provision that further restricts somebody's reapplying to an academy or a different magnet academy if they choose to withdraw from one.
So page 11, number 12, the board's already approved. Once a student withdraws from academy, the student cannot reapply to academy during the same school year unless extenuating circumstances exist. So there is no clause there about them being able to apply the next year.
Right.
So the board's already, your committee already approved that, so you're asking me to...
I'm asking that if you think there needs to be further, if you don't think there needs to be further restrictions, then we don't need to do anything. If you do, then obviously by Wednesday come back and tell us if we do or not.
Okay.
All right, so the next thing, we have sibling priority data, and we also have the, oh, I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
Christy Wright, counselor at James. I just wanted to urge everyone to think about the requirements for continuation for this year. It's about 35% done with this school year. To change the rules at this point for the students that are in the program, it might be difficult to communicate that. So it might be, maybe I'm just a cautious person, but for the requirements to, you know, I guess you would use the term grandfather in our students that are in the program this year because they signed up for something not knowing what that the rules were going to change. None of us knew. So that's just a recommendation of how are we going to, we want to make this change as seamless as possible so that it's successful.
What is the intent on that?
Well, I want to say thank you because that was something that I said I was going to bring up and I did forget. We do have students that are into their academies, especially when you look at the K-5 group, that we need to make a decision. Are they falling under the grade requirements we're putting in? Our freshman students, is it effective immediately? Or are the requirements going to take place with the new entrant students and we work up? That's not something we discussed in our committees. It is something that was brought up several times, inquiring. So our freshmen that were accepted this year at Carencro High School AYT, next year they're going to fall under these requirements for continuance when they entered without any district guidelines.
Does the C average apply only to the current school year? Or is it a cumulative time in the program?
I think that the C, I mean, if you're talking about the C average, you were talking about the previous year's grades. So that...
Because if it's a school year, then it shouldn't matter, right?
You're talking about end of the year?
Well, we should be able to apply these to the current freshmen at AOIT for the 18-19 school year, because then we would only be measuring the 18-19 school year for continuance, right? And they would have plenty of time to understand that they need to have a C.
You're correct, but I think the comment was that some kids have about 35% of their grade in the can.
No, and I'm agreeing that we shouldn't be applying it to 17-18.
So
I agree with that.
So board
no matter what.
members, it would be appropriate just to grandfather these new entrance continuance requirements in place.
Why don't we just make it effective 2018-2019?
Just
which was going to kind of be a little bit of my comment in that, because the world language immersion has a task force that Dr. Aguilar is gathering of immersion specialists and principals of the various programs, and because there are several of these changes that impact immersion maybe a little differently than they do the other academy programs in the district, that I was hoping maybe we could delay the immersion implementation of these rules until 18-19. specifically the sibling and the what we talked about with immersion being not specialized instruction, simply instruction in a different language, where we don't want children who may get an F in math to be removed from the immersion program, because the kid's going to have an F in math even if he's learning it in English. You know, he needs more instruction, not instruction in a different language. So I would appreciate that if you would consider doing something along those lines.
And Dr. Aguilar, that's why you're the superintendent. We look to you for recommendations. So as far as some of this stuff obviously is more administrative, and some of it is a little bit more raising the bar, more restrictive. So I think that, again, we could benefit from you telling us as our educational leader how we should implement the handbook.
Yes, sir. We'll make some recommendations on Wednesday.
And you know, it could simply be these are the guidelines that will be in effect. You should really try to be in compliance with them over the next year.
Yes, sir.
You know, something like that.
We'll talk about this tomorrow and try to update this handbook to post by 5:30 tomorrow afternoon in anticipation of the board meeting on Wednesday.
Yes, sir.
Doc, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I happen to agree with my friend at Alamo, whose name is escaping my mind, Ms. Gardner, that the academies are a privilege, somewhat of a privilege. My question to you is, do you agree with that? And if you do you also agree that immersion is a privilege?
I don't necessarily want to characterize our academies as a privilege. I think it's an opportunity that the district makes available to students, but we want to make sure that if we're going to call these things magnet institutions as such, that the academic requirements are strict, very appropriate for the label. The idea of French or Spanish or Chinese immersion is something that is going to take quite a bit of conversation by this task force that we will name Wednesday. And those are good conversations. I think we have opportunities to really increase the potential for foreign languages in the Lafayette Parish school system. But just on the surface, I would characterize the language immersion classes separate and apart from just general academy programs that we have.
All right, so we're going to move forward with now, I would like to discuss the Magnet Academy due process, because I think that'll be pretty quick. I think it will be pretty quick. All right. So let's pull that one up. And I will go ahead and read it. If any will, I will go ahead and read it. Why not? Magnet Schools Academy due process. Number 1, after the first violation for any enrollment expectation, a meeting between the student and the academy director, principal, will be documented with a written plan to resolve the deficiency. A letter documenting the violation will be placed in the student's academy file and mailed to the parent explaining the deficiency and the plan to resolve the deficiency. If a second violation for any enrollment expectation occurs, a meeting between the student parent and the academy director principal will be documented with a written plan to resolve the deficiency. A letter documenting the violation will be placed in the student's academy file. Academy probation will result in the third violation for any enrollment expectation. A meeting between the student parent, academy director principal, and the administrator counselor will be documented with a written plan established to resolve the deficiency. The student will be placed on academy probation. A letter documenting the violation will be placed in the student's academy file and mailed to the Magnet Academy's office. A recommendation for removal from the academy will occur with the fourth violation of any enrollment expectation. A meeting between the student, parent, and academy director principal will be documented detailing the reasons for the student to be recommended for removal from the academy. The academy director principal will submit the request to the Magnet Academy's department. The Magnet Academy's department will determine if the student will be removed from the academy. Parents can appeal the decision to the Magnet Academy's department within 5 business days of receiving the removal notice. Receiving removal notice. So, do any of our board members have any comments on that document? I have a question on where, is this going to be this like a floating document, or is this going to be a part of a policy, or is this going to be a part of the handbook?
We envision this would be added to the handbook.
Okay, so this will be a section to the handbook. Got it. All right, do we have any public comment on the due process procedure for removal from an academy? All right, any comment on that? Okay. Does anybody feel like it's necessary to actually vote that this go in? Okay, I don't think so. It seems like it's unanimous that we would like to add this, and we have no comment on it as of today. So we will go back to the sibling priority data.
So, Mr. Knezik, number 5, I think it was page 10. Page 10, number 5, probation. Since it's pretty much teased out in the due process, I believe we'll take out the probation, number 5 in the handbook, and insert this in its place. In other words, I want to make sure it fits.
Okay, so we're going back to the Magnet Academy's handbook,
Yes,
page
sir.
10.
10. Number 5.
Number 5, probation.
Ozzy, you think that would be a good place to put it, due process?
So are you going to eliminate the word probation in that section and then just put in there due process with that section? Is that the intent?
Yes, sir.
That seems to be appropriate to me. All right. Sounds like we have a consensus on that. All right, so we are back to the sibling priority data. Dr. Aguilar, how would you like to present this information?
So if you don't mind, Mr. Knezik, I'd like to walk through some of the attachments that are available, if that's acceptable to you.
Before we do that, do you mind if we just do a quick break, maybe
Not at all.
3-minute break? All right, thank you. All right, thank you for indulging the break. So we're going to talk about the sibling priority data presented by the superintendent and the staff.
So the first members of the committee, I want to make sure we say publicly that there was a meeting held on October 14th, and this committee discussed an agenda item tagged 2.10, and there were a number of documents that were made public during that meeting, specifically sibling data and LPSS demographics. I want to make sure that on record I notify you that those two documents should not have been placed in the public section of the meeting. It was done by error. That information was incorrect and contained incomplete data. What I would like to show you tonight is the best reflection of sibling data that the staff's been able to compile over the last 10 days. So I want to begin with a file called Sibling Percent Analysis. Ozzy, you pull that up. You're looking at the schools in the district that are not schools of choice, and you're looking at 17-18, 16-17, and 15-16 data, and you are looking at the percent of students in those non-schools of choice schools. And I want you to note that the average percent of students in those schools is roughly 35%. If you look at the last row, in 17-18, the composite percent siblings in those non-schools of choice was 34.75%.
And Dr. Aguilar, just for clarification, when you have a, let's just say a pair, a sibling pair, if I go to Acadian Middle, the 152 number under sibling, and that sibling pair would be number 151 and 152, right?
That's correct. In this report, we're pulling all siblings in the same household.
Thank you.
So we're looking at a very good definition of sibling. So in the non-schools of choice, the average percent of seats filled by siblings is about 35%. So if we close out that file, Ozzy, and pull up the schools of choice sibling percent analysis, we're looking at the 100% schools of choice elementary schools, Leo Judy's, Myrtle Place, and J. Wallace James. And looking at these 100% schools of choice sites, the average percent of siblings varied from a low of 29.04% in 17-18 to 39.02% in 15-16, but very similar to the percent of siblings found in the non-100% schools of choice.
And again, we're not talking this last, not the file that's shown now, but the file you're referring to. This file here, under sibling, we're not talking about any sort of how they got into the school, any sort of priority. We're talking about the total number of siblings attending these schools. I just want to make sure I understand that right.
That's correct. And so I was just notified that we have one cell missing in this table. However, it does not change the conclusions that you can draw from schools of choice. If you look at the complete 16-17 and 15-16 data, it's about 37 to 39%. So now if we look at the file called Schools of Choice, Leo Judy's and James Data Summary, on the table at the top of that document, you're looking at the number of students who have entered those schools of choice through sibling priority designation. So in the case of Leo Judy's in the 12-13 school year, 65% of students entered through the general lottery, 35% through sibling priority. In 13-14, 38% entered through sibling priority. In 14-15, 37%. In 15-16, 35%. In 16-17, 33%. And this current school year, 34% entered through sibling priority. Now, they may have continued through pathway priority, having entered. J. Wallace James data reflects 39% in 12-13 sibling priority, 39% in 14-15, 35% in 16-17, and 35% in 17-18. And so I hope you can appreciate that the district average for non-schools of choice is about 35% seats filled by way of siblings. The number of seats filled in our 100% schools of choice is likewise somewhere between 32 to 38%. And so we can continue to parse this information, but I think the reality is that there is some value to having siblings and households feeding into schools and having a relationship with the faculty, the principal, the community. So I would suggest to the members of this committee that we use the idea that 65% of seats in the 100% schools of choice schools ought to be dedicated and committed to general lottery, and that we try to maintain roughly 35% of seats to sibling priority.
So you're not suggesting that we restrict the sibling, you're just saying that we should reserve 65% of, I assume, the previous year's seats? Is that
65, I'm sorry?
You're saying that we should not put a restriction on the siblings, but reserve about 65% of the previous year's seats to the general lottery?
That's correct. In fact, if you check your agenda in board docs, you will see that the recommended action reads as such: the Schools of Choice Committee recommends to the full board that sibling enrollment at J. Wallace James and Leo Judy's elementary schools be limited to no more than 35% of the total school enrollment for the 18-19 school year. I want to offer to you that we've thought long and hard about this question of what's right and appropriate in terms of guaranteed seats. And even as late as Saturday, this past Saturday, there were conversations that were had about guaranteeing certain numbers or percents of seats available to the general lottery and also to sibling priority. My impression is that we are nowhere out of balance at this point. We have not characterized any school as being filled completely with siblings and preventing large numbers of general lottery seats from being available. But we do have to monitor the number of seats that are guaranteed through sibling priority. And so what I would offer to you, board members, is a possible motion language that would read something like this. The Schools of Choice Committee recommends to the full board that the superintendent regulate number of available sibling slots at J. Wallace James and Leo Judy's elementary schools to a target range of 32 to 38% of overall total student enrollment for the 18-19 school year, to achieve a population of 65% lottery and 35% sibling priority. The goal here would be that we're not going to ask anybody to leave either of those schools. We're not going to make any draconian changes to definitions at this point, but as we look at the current percent of sibling seats at both Leo Judice and J. Wallace James, that my office would annually identify what number of seats would be available to be allocated to sibling priority, knowing that the goal would be to continue and achieve roughly a 35-65% split in the population.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. I want to say that I agree that it is important. Sibling priority is important. However, I also feel that allowing, I've said it 1,000 times before, it's a broken record, allowing the lottery process to take place for everybody having the same opportunity is also important. And so I was never for, and I'm still not for, just limiting sibling priority. So I want to thank you for this compromise. I also want to state on the record that I'm sorry you all had to go through this rigorous process of the numbers, because I never felt like the numbers were really important here based on what my concerns are. My concerns are just making sure that everybody has the same opportunity. And I think that opening up, whether the number 65% or 60% or 70% of seats to the lottery is a humongous step in the right direction. And I don't think that we need to limit sibling priority at all. I mean, with the exception of Leo Judice, because they're landlocked, I mean, if we have to move a Butler building and expand the program, that's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody in the lottery system has the same opportunity. So I've taken my comments a little further than you've taken yours, but I can certainly support your what I'll call a compromise to what was originally on the table.
Thank you. And members of the board, I did not discuss Myrtle Place at all, but I do want you to know today at 4:30 today, we finished the same analysis for Myrtle Place Elementary School. That's why it's not posted. Roughly the percent of sibling priority seats it's just not it's not even significant, so that's why they're not mentioned at all. And we haven't talked about other schools of choice because it doesn't apply. There's nowhere near the population of siblings that we have in Leo, Judice, and James.
Right. You're referring to elementary.
Yes.
Right.
That's correct.
You know, and I've brought this up many times. My concern is also middle and high, even though there's no, quote, sibling priority. A sibling that got in, and this is old news to you, but a sibling that got in at kindergarten because of their sibling is still sibling priority all the way to through high school. And so this concept would slowly but surely shore up the program from my perspective.
Dr. Aguilar, do you see any need to make the language a little bit more general, just so that it does encompass all of the 100% schools of choice? Or do you want to keep it at James and Leo?
Mr. Knezik, I don't have a problem if we make this general rule applicable to all schools of choice.
And what I was also wondering, so I'm interested in potentially taking your language and saying regulate the number of just regulate the available slots at 100% schools of choice to achieve a population of 65% of the general lottery. And you can take all the references to siblings out of the entire motion. So it really becomes a task. What I was saying was that we make the motion where it says available where it says available instead of siblings, just say slots at 100% schools of choice to achieve a population of 65% general lottery. And then I don't think you need to mention everything else. The mechanics of everything else.
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure.
I'm just jotting notes.
So, that the superintendent, right, after that first little bit, that the superintendent regulate the number of available slots at 100% schools of choice, or 100% academies, magnet academies, elementary schools, skip everything else, and then say to achieve a minimum population of 65% general lottery. Something along those lines.
So, Mr. Knezik, I anticipated that request. And I want to tell you, I do not believe that language works. And let me explain to you why. If you are setting the minimum general population number at 65%, then you're disregarding what happens if you continue to add siblings. For example, looking at J. Wallace James, right now they have 927 students. And if they add 10 siblings to that population for the upcoming school year, they would have 384 sibling seats filled at the school, which would mean the non-sibling portion of that equation would have to jump up from 553 general lottery seats to 602 general lottery seats, which means to add 10 siblings to J. Wallace James means we've added 59 additional seats. It continues at that rate such that if you add just 10 siblings for each year over a 3-year period, the number of seats needed to fill that school and equal 65% lottery, 35% sibling priority would be 150 extra chairs in that building. It doesn't work for James. It works even less for Leo Judy's. You add 10 students to Leo Judy's as siblings, you add 33 extra seats in the first year. So on Saturday, I believed that regulating general lottery to 65% was an easy solution to this very complex consideration, but I think the best advice would be to regulate the number of seats attributable to siblings as the best way to control population growth in those schools, because quite frankly neither of those schools can really add 100 more students or even 60 more students or even one more temporary building at Leo Judy's.
So I think we get that, but what I'm missing out on, and maybe I can be re-educated, if you have X amount of seats available, 10 seats available, 6.5 seats go to lottery, and 3.5 seats go to siblings. What am I missing out on here? How are you adding any more students to the school? You're taking what's available and you're splitting it out.
Well, if you're making the 35% larger, then the 65%'s got to grow also.
Who's making the?
Well, if you have 10 more siblings in these,
going to limit siblings.
The superintendent, like I mentioned, if we want to add teachers in classrooms, then grow the program. If not, then yes.
Well, and therein lies the responsibility of the board to decide: are you going to have exponential growth, or are you going to regulate this based on our capacity and our financial constraints?
Well, I'm comfortable with your putting the responsibility on you to regulate according to this motion. I think that's wonderful. We all know you have a solution, Mr. Santani. Yes, sir. Do you want to speak?
I got a real simple solution. It seems like nobody wants to take responsibility for this, so let's do nothing. I don't see why 35% at J. Wallace James and 34% at LEO Judice is 35% parish-wide. Why are we spending any time on this? It's not an issue. Can anybody give me what the problem is?
Well, obviously we can't, but I'll try one more time. I mean, if we use the
You haven't given it to me yet. You used a lot of words, but you haven't given it to me
I'm
yet.
about to, if you'll allow me to take the floor.
Please.
The superintendent just described if we're increasing siblings just based on the fact that, you know, a sibling is applying, then we're essentially, if we do nothing, we're essentially reducing the number of seats for general lottery. That is unacceptable to me, and that's the problem I have with it.
Why will more siblings apply next year than this year? When parish-wide, really what we're talking about is fertility rates, right? Because parish-wide, 35% of our students are sibling. 35% of our students in J. Wallace James and LEO Judice are siblings. Why should we expect more than 35% next year when we got 35% this year?
Kind of similar to the last issue that you were up here about. If we don't expect it, then what's the problem with the recommendation?
So, Mr.
Well, there's no problem with the recommendation today. What about unintended consequences?
You mean like the situation we're in now?
So, Mr. Broussard.
What's the situation we're in now? I don't see the problem.
Yeah, let me just give Mr. Broussard a chance to talk.
You know, at some point I just wanted to say we just leave as is and start anew for next year. But I've got a concern about the 35-65. I would rather see it, if we're going to keep it at 35, that's what your data showed, that we're 35% siblings priority, to have at least a 5% proximity, 60% lottery. We're forgetting the middle person. We've got to have some proximity in there to allow the kids in the area, if qualified, to attend the school of choice. We had the lottery system with A to B, and you know it was unfair, and we did away with that. But I would prefer, and I cannot vote for the 65-35, or because it doesn't have a proximity in there. We got to include all the students. The motion. Well, that's my motion.
All right. Do you want to make a formal motion?
Make the motion that we allow the 35% sibling priority, 5% proximity, 60% lottery.
So your motion is to modify what Dr. Aguilar, with an addition of, with reducing the 65 to 60 and adding a 5% proximity.
That's the motion, from 65 to 60, adding the 5% proximity.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. We have a second by Mr. Hidalgo. So I'm going to open that up to public comment. While we are, I'm just going to give you an opportunity to speak again.
So, Mr. Kniezek, how will we determine, or what will be the definition of the proximity? So when we're looking at our data that we have about where students reside now, we'll get an idea if we do have 5% already or not. How is it defined?
Well, Mr. Broussard?
Does that 5% have to end into the sibling priority, or does it have to go through the lottery system? If there's some students in the proximity, how do they enter? Do they enter through the lottery system? I would imagine some of them are in because of the sibling priority, but I would think that 5% should stand alone.
I think even from previous discussions, and to answer your question, Ms. Samick, for example, J. Wallace James, if you imagine J. Wallace James as a house where would J. Wallace James be zoned to? So when you talk about proximity, and you're talking about students that would naturally, for example, be zoned to S.J. Montgomery, to pull from those. Is that helping to explain it a little bit? For the proximity.
Yeah, I'm seeking clarification. We're talking about a 1 mile radius, a 5 mile radius. Are we talking about going back and looking at the old J. Wallace James zone when it was not a school of choice before the new building was constructed? I'm just trying to seek clarification so we know how to look at the data to know perhaps 5% are already in attendance. And same thing for Leo Judice. So I kind of need to know a definition of the proximity zone.
I can understand the question you're asking, but what would proximity be? But did those students get in there through the lottery system? If they were chosen through the lottery system, through what it was previous before, 50-60% lottery system. But I'm saying that if we are going to have the 5%, the 5% does not go through the 60% lottery system because it do not fit into the 35%. Those 5% stand alone. As far as boundaries, we could go back into whatever the zone was, or do the 1 mile or 2 mile radius.
Okay, Ms. Samick, if you pull the general pool, that's I think what Mr. Broussard is talking about, from the general pool, not sibling or anything else, just from.
Why don't you come on up and comment?
Christy Wright, counselor at James. The only thing, Mr. Broussard, that worries me about you saying that is I think we have more than 5% of our applicants that are actually being selected from the zone that you speak of. And if we have 50 applicants from that zone, how will we decide which 5% of those 50 applicants are going to get in on the proximity? I think I have a breakdown of where our students come from, and there's a majority of students that come from the proximity area of our school. So actually, by saying 5%, my worry is that you're limiting the proximity. You're causing us to say we can only use that amount. Or how do you choose which 5% of all of those applicants if we have 200 that live in the zone?
I'm not saying only 5% should be limited, but only 5% should be guaranteed. The other percentage is entered into the 60% lottery, like they are now.
Oh, okay. Well, I did.
It should be a guaranteed of at least that 5%.
Yes, I think we're probably well over 5% right now of the proximity. So at least at our school, it shouldn't be a big change.
I understand, but I would love to see some of the students in the nearby area being able to enter to school that's across the street from their house. That's my thing is I stay 2 blocks from the school, and no one in my area goes there. Of course, there's some more young kids there anyway, but still, none of the kids, they're zoned 7-8 miles down the road. So I just a guaranteed 5% of them, and then the rest of them going to lottery or fill into Sibling Priority, whatever the case may be.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Hi, Melanie Brevis, Myrtle Place. I guess my concerns as far as proximity goes is I feel like it's very arbitrary. And you mentioned, people within 2 blocks of your home not being able, or within 2 blocks of the school not being able to get in. However, just because you limit it to, 5%, or if you give 5% of those seats guaranteed for proximity, that could still go to somebody a half mile away or a mile away. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody within those 2 blocks is going to get in. And I know you did not mean it this way, but I just feel like it's implied. I mean, nobody is denied a chance. I mean, everybody within your 2 blocks can apply for that school. It's not that they're not being able to get in. It's not that they're not able to apply. It's just they're in the pool with everybody else, from Karen Crow, from Scott, from wherever. And it's, it's everybody gets that equal chance. And I guess my question, similar to what Ms. Wright said, is that I would really like to see the data, because I know for myself in Myrtle Place, I mean, we have a ton of walkers. We have a ton of people that live right in that neighborhood and in that community that go to that school. So again, I would think, similar to what she said about her school, we're way over 5% as far as, people that live close to school being able to go. And I guess my other question would just be, which one trumps the other? Because we also have a lot of younger siblings coming in, who live right across the street from the school or down the road from the school. So I just feel like there's a lot of ambiguity, and it might ultimately get 1 or 2 peoples in who live across the street from the school, who might have, not been randomly selected before, but at the same time, it doesn't guarantee that. And it essentially gives somebody, I feel, an unfair advantage just because they happen to be right by the school or live within a certain distance of the school, whereas there might be someone else out in Karen Crow or Youngsville or someplace that is equally, economically disadvantaged, say, that doesn't get that special entry.
I can understand what you're saying if the ones that are now in there now, that's within that proximity, in it because of what was 60-70% lottery. But one of the siblings, if you have a sibling there, then the next one's there because they are a sibling. But what I'm implying is that the 5% is guaranteed if you don't get in because you are not one of the 5% that got the seat. Then you can enter into the 60%, which is remaining. You still have a chance to go in, even though if you don't make the 5%. So you still has a chance to go in. You've got 2 chances to enter, versus the other way you only had 1.
Okay, but I guess I feel like, even as far as new incoming students, we have a lot of new families all the time that live very close that are getting in, without any kind of proximity priority.
Because of the lottery system.
Right, but they were in there just like anyone else, and
but
yet.
If you give them, if you give them that 5% chance, and it don't make it, whether they give them a 65% chance, because they got the 5, then the 60% comes in if they don't get in the first time. I just want to see a closer. We want to build a neighborhood type support school, and it's important that some of the neighborhoods be involved in the school. It's okay if you've got some from all over the parish of Lafayette. That's fine. It's great. It's welcome. But it's that to belong to the school in your neighborhood gives you a greater desire to support it.
But what I'm saying, at least for our school, and I think from what Ms. Wright was saying, that's already happening at our schools. I mean, we're already seeing the neighborhood come in. I mean, that's why I would like to see the data be examined a little closer before we actually add something like priority, no matter how small. Thank you.
So, Mr. Knezik.
Yes, sir.
So, I guess we're talking about James, I suppose, in particular. So, the kindergarten class has 136 students total. 141? 144. And guaranteeing 5% for proximity would be 7 students out of that kindergarten class. I would support your recommendation. I believe both James and Elio Judy's could easily tag more than 5% of students to proximity. It's really not that big a deal. If it makes you comfortable, and I don't see a problem with this.
All right, next.
Hi, my name is Sonia Hartley. I'm a counselor at J. Wallace James. I have a map. I'll email it to you if you want me to. But we took all of the kids that are at our school, all the homes at our school, and we mapped them out. And you can see a big majority of the students come right from the area right around our school. That's the big red space right here in the middle. So I feel like we do have that. We also have kids from all over, and I think that's what makes our school special. So that's it.
Let me say this. I'm not targeting any school as far as not doing that. I just feel like a 5% guarantee would be an easier pathway to go there. James is a model school. James has the balance, is doing an exceptional job, and I would put James, because it's my school, I would put James on top of every school in Parish of Lafayette because it's the model school. But we got a better chance of getting those kids in there with the 5%. If they don't get in there, if the H student does not get in there with the 5%, then you got a chance to get in with the 60%, lottery. And I'm not saying that anyone is doing anything to avoid certain kids from coming in. I'm not saying that at all. I just feel that the 5% proximity would work real good in my area, especially not just with James or L.E. Judy's, but with the STEMS Academy. We don't know what they did that proves that. So that's why I'm pushing the 5%. Give them a greater chance, not over anyone else, but to give them a 5% and to get out of 5%, it's a 60% chance of getting in. More opportunity.
So my concern is that by opening up kind of a proximity lottery, because that's what we're talking about, because you're going to have more than probably 7 students apply from the local school, is that you're giving. So I could go to Willow Park Apartments right there on Willow, rent an apartment, move there with my youngest son. Then he gets to try out for 5%, and then he gets to try out for 30% or 35% for sibling. And then he gets to try out for 60%. And then once he gets in, my wife will be happy and I can move back in the house. So that's my issue, is the more these kind of special requirements you're putting in, the more loopholes you're also creating that people can take advantage of. And I mean, that took me literally 5 minutes to think of how to game the system like that.
With one problem. It's not a tryout for sibling right now. There's no tryout.
Sorry.
No tryout.
No, well, yeah, right now. But I went off of the 35%. So if Dr. Aguilar looks at it and says, you know what, this year we can only have 100 siblings and 120 apply, there's got to be a lottery.
Right. We don't want to allow. I say we. I mean, it seems like that we don't want to allow Mr. Broussard's concept because that may take a seat from someone else, but that's what the Sibling Priority is doing now.
No,
I think there's some confusion. If I may explain, and Barbara Pippin's not here to explain, so I'm going to try to do it as best as she would. You don't try out for multiple priorities. When you apply, if you're eligible for a tag, for when the lottery event executes, you get a sibling tag, or you would get a proximity tag, or you would get no tag or pathway tag, whatever it is. So you don't get like 3 chances or 2 chances or 1 chance. You get a tag, and that's your tag. So if you set the parameters, let's say if you're going to keep your sibling priority for total school at 35-65, then next year you'd have to reduce your number of sibling priority to a different percentage to make sure that you don't default that 35-65. So you would have maybe hypothetically 10% allocated towards sibling priority. So you could have 10% for sibling priority and maintain 5% for proximity, and the rest would be general pool. And if they don't get in with either of those 2 priorities, they would just, that's how that works. Just to explain that. So you don't get 1 or 2 or 3, you can't get in with sibling and proximity and then general pool. It's whichever one that you're assigned a tag for.
Okay. All right. I'm going to call for the vote.
One for, two against.
All right, that motion fails. Dr. Aguilar, I want to make sure I understand that you believe that you need to have intervention in the enrollment of James and Leo to you believe that you need to regulate, that you need to have, you need to be empowered to regulate enrollment at this time at those two schools. I guess that's my question.
Yes, sir.
You do?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
And you're asking for us to empower you to regulate those two schools' enrollment for 1 year, not annually, but just for 1 year.
Just for 1 year. And to be clear, I'm asking you to allow me a target range of 32 to 38%.
Okay. Fellow board members, I would like to make a motion. The Schools of Choice Committee recommended to the full board that the superintendent regulate the number of available sibling slots at J.W. James and Leo Judice elementary schools to a target range of 32 to 38% of the overall total student enrollment for the 2018-2019 school year to achieve a population of 65% general lottery, period. We have a motion and a second. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very similar motion to the previous, except it does not address a 5% proximity, and it also does not have a actual topside restriction on sibling priority. It empowers the superintendent to regulate the admissions of 32 to 38% of the overall population for siblings, so that he can achieve a target of 65% of the general lottery for those two schools for the next year. Do we have any public comment on that motion, which should be on your board? We do have one. Mr. Centani.
But it was fresh and terrible, I'll tell you that. I can't see the words anymore. Excuse me for 1 second. It's going to be very similar to what I said a little while ago. So while this is coming up, can I ask a clarification from what Ozzy said earlier about you get a tag, you're not A or B or C, or you are A or B or C, you're not A and B and C. You are 35% plus one sibling. So that means one sibling is going to be left out. Well, whatever the number is.
Right. The way this, as far as I understand it, and the way that I think the motion reads, unless we vary that 65% to be a little more loosey-goosey like the 32 to 38% is, the intent is to allow him the flexibility to achieve his 65% by manipulating that 32 to 38%.
All right. So I was going to say,
as I understand it, there is no restriction to sibling priority. Right now, as that if the the manual is approved, there is no restriction to sibling priority. So Dr. Aguilar would have to figure out how he's going to figure this out.
So you have two numbers, and you've given him two levers, right? And you've said you must hold this one lever constant at 65% of the total school population. He's also said earlier in the meeting that there are no room for additional classrooms on these two campuses. So there's no room to increase the end result number. You've told him you got to hold this one at 65. You are by definition fluctuating the sibling number with this motion.
So, Mr. Knezik, Mr. Centani is correct. I would recommend that you consider putting your period at the end of 2018-19 school year, that you allow me the authority to regulate a target range of 32 to 38% for siblings in those two schools.
I am more than happy to do that.
But then we get right back to the like, what does this achieve? I'm genuinely asking what this achieves, because it doesn't seem to me that you are changing anything that you intend to change.
Mr. Centani, we're likely not changing anything because it currently falls in that range. I think if it gets above 38%, it becomes a problem potentially, and this board would need to be notified that we're starting to see a tendency to have a larger percent of seats filled by siblings. At this point, it largely maintains the status quo.
Sure, but and this is my point here. So we're really having a discussion on what the percentage is that we feel is a problem, right? This is ultimately what we're talking about.
Well, and if you look at the data for the non-schools of choice, and you look at the percent of siblings, J.W. Falk is 50.47% seats filled by siblings. Austin is 42%. Live Oak is 46%. As it approaches the numbers greater than 38%, we just have to evaluate what we're doing and why we're doing those things.
Well, sure. So, but that doesn't quite answer the question. What is the number that we feel is too much? Too many siblings? What is the number?
I think we all have a different opinion on the number.
Well, that's fine. We're here to have a conversation about it, right? We can't have these conversations on Wednesday, but we're having a conversation tonight. So, what is the number, Mr. Knezik, where you feel there is an issue? What percentage of siblings is too much? That it begins to impede fairness in your mind?
Well, I'm comfortable with these numbers. I mean, I'm comfortable with him restricting it between this 32 and 38%. That's what I'm comfortable with. I know that other board members are more concerned, not so much about the ratio, but more concerned about the opportunity for the next year, right? If this is the case and 32%, let's just say, get in by sibling priority, that means that 32% of those seats that year were not available to everybody else in the general lottery. And that's the concern, I think, of other board members that aren't here tonight.
And just to show you that I have very similar concerns, this past year we opened additional pre-K sections at Prairie and Evangeline. We only opened one at Myrtle Place when Dr. Aguilar and the principal wanted to open two. And I told them, I said I would really rethink that until the following year, because we only have 3 kindergarten sections and we won't have room for an additional kindergarten section until the following school year. So opening 2 pre-K sections would necessarily only leave 23 kindergarten spots to siblings and general lottery, basically turning the pre-K lottery into the kindergarten lottery. And so the point being that I think it was J. Wallace James, you have about half of your kindergarten size is pre-K, like 60 pre-K, 120. So, like, that's just to show you, I have very similar concerns. However, this, we may be voting on and putting a limit on what the numbers are today, but I don't see, even if they go up to 38, like, what happens to that first kid that's over the limit? Because Ozzy just said they don't get to go to the general lottery, so that's not what she said. Well, so they don't get tagged 2 ways either, though, right? Right? That's what you said. And so if you have 3 more siblings apply than you have seats available for siblings, the 3 who do not get pulled, they're done. They're not going to that school. They don't get to then get put into the pool for the 65% of the seats.
Mr. Centani, my intention is we're going to work with the programmer and develop protocols so that everybody has an equal chance of getting a seat.
Or we could do
regardless of what the system does today. If we're going to start having a quota, then
my point is we don't need it. We don't need the quota. That's my point anyway. So, I'll let y'all be now.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for entertaining me.
Ms. Sammy, do we know offhand approximately how many students are on any waiting list on our 100% school of choice schools that are not a sibling?
I don't have that in front of me, and that's not in my memory bank.
Okay. Do we have a waiting list at our schools of choice, at our 100% schools of choice locations at this time? Did one exist immediately after the lottery?
Yes.
Okay. So my question then becomes, what about those students? Let's say it's 10 or 50. What about those students? It's like, okay, so we have one or two siblings who don't get in or who are not on the sibling priority list. But what about the 10 or 50 students on the waiting list that didn't get in? So again, I'm not concerned. I'm not trying to limit sibling priority. I'm just want to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity. And the word priority itself pretty much limits equality, so or at least equity. And so I think it's sad that it is come to this. What happens to that 1, 2, or 3 or third sibling? But what happens to the 10 students who applied that didn't get in because of a priority? That's where I am. I'm not trying to limit sibling priority, but if that is the unintended consequence, then it needs to be well thought out. And I don't think looking at the existing numbers, again, the existing numbers are not relevant to me because that's not my argument. My argument is not I think it needs to be 30%. My argument is you have a waiting list and those people didn't get the same chance these people got, and it's mostly about convenience, in my opinion.
Yes, sir.
So, no, I'm on. So one thing that's been said many times about sibling priority is fairness, and I'll go back to something that one of my friends who's a kindergarten teacher and had to teach this to her students is fairness is not everybody getting the same chance. Fairness is everybody getting what they need to succeed. And what a lot of these families need because of the location of the school is the ability to bring both of their siblings, both of their children to that school. So for the majority of the schools of choice are on the north side. They're 15 out of the 17 are north of the river. So you're automatically putting families, 30% of the population that's below the river, at a disadvantage because now if they don't have some guarantee that their sibling, that their other children could possibly attend, then they are having to look at splitting their family across the city. And so to me, when we talk about fairness, fairness is not everybody gets the same coin flip. Fairness is families that get in have the ability and have what they need to help the student that's already in succeed, which is the younger siblings also being able to go that route.
So what about a parent who has a student in elementary school and a child in middle school? That's two different campuses.
Yep.
They may not be in a pathway. They may be at their zone school. So and Lord knows we don't want to put our kids on the bus these days. So you're going to bring your child to this school and then haul the other one across. Listen, I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to make it unfair for you all, but until we changed the name, it was schools of choice, and the key word is choice. It's the choice to go there. I mean, I hear it all the time in my district. All the schools in District 9 are schools of choice.
Yeah.
People choose to buy their house there to go to school there.
Correct.
So, that one just doesn't do it for me. I'm not talking about my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the majority of the kids that live in District 9, but I'm talking about every child across the parish who wants the same opportunity to get into that school of choice, that academy, that magnet academy that I would consider, I don't want to say to be a privilege, but definitely to be something above their zone school, clearly,
yeah.
because they're applying to get in.
Yeah, And well, but to me, to answer your question, is that's why this sibling priority is only applied to elementary. They're only looking at elementary because it is a different type of school and support system that you have to do for an elementary than a middle school. And I send my kids ride the bus. They're in first and kindergarten. They ride the bus. I pick them up at Target. I have no problem with that. So, but in my opinion, what you're doing is you're putting the citizens on the south side especially at a disadvantage, because imagine parents that, yes, my kid got in, they're going to J. Wallace James, my second child, I've got to get to Green Tea Linden. And it's...
But if they live in the district, their child just needs to get on a bus. They don't have to get them anywhere. Get them to the bus stop.
But the issue is, especially with the magnet schools, you have the after school, you have the Dancing with the Stars, you have the Painting with the Stars,
again,
which are all part of the criteria to stay enrolled, that you have to do those things, and now you also have to support your child that is 40 miles away at the other school. I'm just saying that you're putting an area of the town at a disadvantage to get there because they made the choice to have a second child. That's my...
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Yes, sir. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, yep.
West Gotro, my kids my son goes to Myrtle Place. I appreciate the passion. I respect your position. I saw data come up tonight, and at the risk of agreeing with that man in the corner, I'm trying to understand what's the problem? Do we have a solution looking for a problem? Did you contemplate just sitting pat when you made this recommendation?
This would be a great time.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the last
couple of words. My question is,
is,
did you contemplate just saying, look, guys, the data seems to indicate we're okay. I don't think we need to regulate this.
Actually, I did. If you were here earlier, I indicated that the trend parish-wide is about 35% sibling priority. This board empowered a committee to study schools of choice. That's why we're here tonight.
Agree.
They are working on recommendations that this board will either adopt or not adopt Wednesday night.
Mm-hmm.
I presented data that suggests that Leo Giudice and J. Wallace James are very close to the parish trend of 35% sibling priority. I was clear about that. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I appreciate your response. Thank you.
All right, Miss Dorothy, can you put the updated motion up, please? All right, I'd like to call for the vote.
Two for, one against.
All right, with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Absolutely.